Cześć, hello, vitam, and welcome to Pierogi to Prayer, the official podcast of St. Joseph's Polish Apostolate of the Diocese of Camden, coming to you from our historic home at 1010 Liberty Street in Camden, New Jersey, the heart of South Jersey's Polonia for over 130 years. I am your host, Michael Matulewicz. Situated in the south of Poland, the city of Kraków is a magnet for tourists. This shouldn't be surprising, as visitors find themselves overwhelmed by an absolute wonder of historic sites and monuments, in an atmosphere that makes them feel as though they've traveled through time. Amidst centuries-old streets that are closed to all but pedestrian traffic, the old town center, known as Stare Miasto, looks and feels very much as it has for centuries. Picturesque cafes and shops surround the Rynek, or Market Square, at the center of a lively scene, where visitors find Polish souvenirs and gifts within the shops of the historic Cloth Hall, while the towering steeples of the St. Mary's Church watch over, with its famous bugler calling out the hours across the city, as has been done for centuries. Amidst these iconic buildings, there is also a massive statue that is impossible to miss. The immortalized figure of a heavily mustached man, looking intently over the crowds with book in hand, is a haven for tourists and flocks of pigeons alike to sit for a rest. At the base of the statue, bold lettering identifies the figure as the legendary poet Adam Mickiewicz. This monument, in the very heart of Poland's ancient capital, is dedicated to this lion of Polish national literature. The author and poet is perhaps most famous for his epic poem Pan Tadeusz, which is still required reading in Polish schools, and large sections having been memorized by young pupils. Yet, although recognized as a foundation of Polish literature, the very first lines of this epic contain something of an interesting curiosity, and one that is central to our discussion today. Litwo, ojczyzno moja, ty jesteś jak zdrowie. Or, translated in English, Lithuania, my homeland, you are as health itself. Why then does the epic poem of Poland, written in the Polish language, begin with a line addressing Poland's eastern neighbor, the nation of Lithuania? The answer lies in the centuries-old relationship between these two countries and their people that is central to our topic today. On the 15th of February, 1386, Queen Jadwiga of Poland married Jogaila, the Grand Duke of Lithuania. This would set the stage for the development of what was later to become known as the Polish-LithuanianCommonwealth, a state which would exist until partitions of the 18th century. Like virtually all royal marriages of the time, the union of Jadwiga and Jogaila, known in Polish as Władysław Jagiełło, was a political one, meant to strengthen the state of Poland against the forces and the competing dynastic struggles of the age. Yet, such a union was also in the interest of Lithuania as well, which, by the marriage, made Władysław a Catholic, and therefore no longer vulnerable to Teutonic crusades from the west. As the centuries would go on, Poland-Lithuania would strengthen to be the largest state in Europe, only to then gradually fall into decline. The multicultural aspect of these two ethnic groups and the dozens of others within their borders made for an interesting dynamic of cooperation, but also resentment. Polish remained the official language of state, commerce, religion, and education, oftentimes leaving ethnic Lithuanians feeling understandably sidelined. In the 20th century, such historical grievances were weaponized by nationalistic forces within, and also opportunistic enemies abroad. The complexity of this ancient relationship is often one that is hard for Americans today to understand, including those with Polish-Lithuanian heritage. The tumultuous history of the 20th century with the Cold War and our modern misconceptions of geography and ethnicity are burdens to understanding what is in fact an ancient, complex, and fascinating common history. On this program, we seek to explain Polish history and culture to you. We are long overdue to have welcomed a guest who can shed some light on the Polish-Lithuanian dynamic. Tom Sadowskis is, among other things, a gifted Lithuanian genealogist. As you will hear, his field of research demands a great deal of knowledge of history and geography of Poland and Lithuania. Being a Lithuanian American himself, He also is able to bring his unique perspective from a side that those of us who identify as Polish may not always hear or understand. It is into this, at times confusing state of history and geography that we plunged to get a sense of how this historic relationship between Poles and Lithuanians developed, and what echoes of it we still experience today.
So, good afternoon, Tom Sadauskas. Welcome to Pierogi to Prayer. It's so
Thank you,
delightful
Michael.
to have you on here today. What we'll probably first be able to tell is from your last name that you are of Lithuanian extraction, which is part of our discussion here today. But before we get into everything, maybe just tell a little bit about yourself, a little bit of background information, personally, professionally, where you're joining us from today. You can do that
Sure.
as well, since we're meeting virtually. But
Sure.
just kind of start with that, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, I'm originally born in New Britain, Connecticut, or as many people call it, New Britsky. That's SKY because of the large Polish population there. Uh, I'm Lithuanian American on both sides. My mother's parents both immigrated from Lithuania 1909, 1911. And my father was a displaced person, a DP, that came to the United States back in June of 1949 from Lithuania. So I'm on both sides, though my DNA says I got a little bit of Russian, got a little bit of Finnish, and who knows what else. The fact that my grandparents lived with us in a two-family house, and I can honestly say I never spoke English to my grandparents. I always spoke Lithuanian to them. I mean, that was their first language. They spoke multiple languages. And, my sister would tell my wife that supposedly Tom couldn't speak English when he started kindergarten. I always point out to the fact that my sister was a year old at the time, but my wife says, oh, no, the moms will talk to their daughters much more than they will to the sons. So who knows? So grew up in that area, went to a Lithuanian Catholic parish in my hometown of New Britain, a large immigrant population. So you had two Polish churches. You had a Lithuanian church and a couple of Italian churches, German churches. Went to University of Connecticut for undergraduate, got my degree in accounting there, went into the Air Force. I was an Air Force ROTC, and so I was commissioned a second lieutenant, got into the healthcare management area. And so basically I worked my whole career supporting the military health system, both as an active duty Air Force officer. Then I was a contractor doing health information technology, supporting the military health system. And then 17 years as a GS federal employee, retired back in 2021. And I always tell people my job was helping the DoD to pass a financial audit. And they said, my gosh, you've got lifetime employment. And I just would shake my head, said, no, it's going to take longer than that. In our defense, we do spend something like $92 million an hour, 24/7. So in the course of our podcast, DoD will have spent 92 million in the 60 minutes, if not more, with the war in Iran going on. Got interested in genealogy when I realized that I didn't know a lot about my family history. As a matter of fact, it all started way back in Christmas of 1999. My mom, we were visiting my parents up in Connecticut. My uncle lived upstairs in the two-family house with us. He was supposed to go to church first in the morning, and I hear my mom and dad talking in the kitchen, and next thing you know, my mother comes into the bedroom and says, "Wake up! I think Al's dead. Go upstairs and check." So I'm the fact that I was in healthcare management, I guess I could do the paperwork. So I turned to my lovely wife. I said, "Do you want to come with me?" And she goes, "Heck no. He's your uncle. He's not mine. I like to see my dead people in a funeral home and not upstairs." So I went upstairs. I was hoping he was playing possum, but unfortunately he wasn't. Cold, stiff. He passed away. So it was a struggle to get somebody to come out on Christmas morning and such like that. So that's when I realized that everyone doesn't live forever. You would think by then I would have figured that out, but I started asking questions about genealogy, about the family. It's been my obsession, as my wife would call it. I call it a hobby. It was from 2000. Gone back to tracing some lines in Lithuania back to about 1760. Confident that I've been able to find them from a long line of peasants. I have no delusions of grandeur like some people saying they have nobility. I mean, I think in Lithuanian, probably Poland too, nobility at that point meant you had two horses versus the one that your neighbor had. So that's kind of where I've been. I think, Michael, you attended one of my the presentations. My first one I ever did was for the Polish Genealogical Society of Connecticut in New England. And I was competing with a professor from Poland at the same time. It was a dual 2 tracks. And I thought, well, I need to have something more catchy to get people to come to my presentation. So I think mine was Polish, ? Lithuanian, ? It's all the same, isn't it? So I figured I could handle the villagers coming with the tar and feathers and the torches, and was able to help people know that, I know there is a difference, contrary to what the title of the presentation said. So that kind of brings us up to where, and now I'm retired in Northern Virginia, never planned to be down here. Moved in down here to do some consulting work on total quality management, which is an obscure area that nobody remembers anymore. But I'm about 6 miles as the crow flies from the White House, the Capitol. Interested in politics. I was just advocating up on the hill with a group of people for the Baltic Advocacy Days, trying to help the Baltic nations against their unfriendly neighbor Russia. Because after Ukraine, once that war ends, depending on how it ends, Russians are going to look to see the next area they want to recover. But enough said. I could do a whole nother podcast on that one. But that's kind of where I am and my obsession and enjoying what I'm doing. And it's always interesting to see what you discover. All sorts of new sources. A lot of Polish Genealogy Society sites have helped me. And when we talk more about the difference between, like as Michael said, Sadowski is a Lithuanian name. Those of you should recognize. A lot of times I see Sadowski. I don't know how many. I wish I had $1 every time it happens.
Well, great. Well, I mean, thank you for your service and thank you for the advocacy. I mean, that is an important component of the world we live in, and being, Slavs or members of the Baltic states, it is certainly something that we should be conscious of. And but to your point, you said about growing up sort of in this Lithuanian aura, and so genealogy is something that we talk about a lot on this show, and it's a lot of reasons why people get into their heritage, be it Polish, Lithuanian, whatever. But one of the first questions they do ask are sort of, where are we from? What does our name signify? And, so for my own part, I grew up with a name like Matulewicz, very Polish, very clearly Polish. My grandparents were from a similar town like New Britain. There were 2 Polish churches. There was an Irish, and then there was also a Lithuanian. And in terms of what we understood, what we identified with, it was always just Polish. And then I remember when I first started getting into this genealogy of my own family, there was a kind of an offhanded comment at one point made like, oh, well, part of us could be Lithuanian. So I kind of like just filed that away. And then I came to find out that our family was from very close to modern Lithuania. And a lot of times when people get into genealogy, I start talking and saying, you really need to know the history of a place when you start getting further back. And for people who whether they identify as Polish or Lithuanian or not, when they do go back, they find this nation known as the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And yet, one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to do this particular episode is because people get so lost in that, in understanding what Poland, Lithuania was, and how we understand our own ethnicity. So for my own part, doing the DNA, I actually do have Lithuanian in there. Yet all the records were always in Polish. And so it's just kind of an interesting phenomenon how Polish, even if you are part Lithuanian, seems to come up as at the forefront. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that, about what your experience has been in doing genealogy, either on your own or for other people, or even, a little bit about that talk you gave, because I think that question, that Polish ? Lithuania ? Isn't it the same ? Is one that a lot of people ask.
Yeah, I mean, with the DNA, did that. I've got some Polish, I guess, also Northern Polish and et cetera, et cetera. My grandparents both were from southwest Lithuania, Suvalkia area, that when it was under Russian occupation, the northern half of the Gubernia province in Russian was in present-day Lithuania, and the southern half, including the capital of Suvalkia or Suwalki, depending whose language you want to use, is in present-day Poland. Now, one of the names that I have in my ancestry tree is Lisauskas. Auskas is a popular ending in Lithuanian names and such. And so I have a number of DNA matches where it says they're Lisowski, S-K-I, right? And when I go look at their trees or so, it says they're Polish, right? I go, well, okay. And then I look to see where their ancestor was baptized. And they were baptized in the same Catholic church in Chopin, or I forget what the Polish spelling is, in the same church, okay? And if you look in the clump of Lisauskas, they're in the Chicago area, so I'm guessing it could be they came in the United States early. There wasn't a big enough Lithuanian population. Very well may have also spoke Polish as a second language. And, you don't want to go to that Irish church because they're all Irish. And, yeah, Polish, it's not too bad. It's, and so it's by, maybe 120 years ago, they were ethnic Lithuanians, but we're going to the Polish church and change the name, make it sound a little more Polish so they'd fit in. And then before, the people who started this all are dead. And as far as their kids are concerned, well, we're going to a Polish church. It says Lisowski and such like that. So you never know. And then I think I mentioned to you before, Michael, my father spoke, I don't know, he spoke 5 languages. And at the age of 13, I found a record where he speaks Lithuanian, Polish, and Russian. So I'm going, well, okay, Dad, how do you come to speak Polish? He goes, well, we had a farm and we had some sheep. And so we hired a shepherd to take care of the sheep. And he was from a nearby village, but in that particular village in the middle of Lithuania, not on the borderlands or whatever, everyone spoke Polish as their first language. I'm sure they spoke Lithuanian as their second language or whatever, third, whatever. So here they are speaking Polish as their first language. So I think when we talk about the ethnicity, you go back 200-300 years ago, there was no nationalism. Everyone's not like saying, hey, I'm Polish, here's the Polish flag, I'm Lithuanian, here's the Lithuanian flag. And the rise of nationalism, you look in the history books in the 1800s, 1900s, that kind of was a growth. And, you kind of looked like, well, what language do you speak? And as you mentioned, in the Commonwealth of Poland, Commonwealth of Lithuanian Poland, Lithuanian was the 2 official languages. One was Latin, the other was Polish. So, of course, the Lithuanians kind of got short shrift on that one. And the joke I think I told before was about the Lithuanian peasant who was going to the parish priest and who was Polish or spoke Polish. And they said, well, you have mass going on and everything like that. And then when you do the sermon, it's all in Polish, so why don't you speak and give the sermon in Lithuanian? And the Polish priest looked at him and shook his head and says, you don't understand. God can understand Polish. He can't understand Lithuanian. So that's why it's all in Polish. And as you mentioned, the records, books, you look back and church records, church my dad was baptized in goes back to 1622. The Russians tried to blow it up in 1941, but they failed to do that. Instead, they just killed the priest that was there and the 2 other priests that were visiting. So they're all buried in the graveyard next to my grandparents. That's why we don't have a warm fuzzy towards Russians. Anyway, so, all the records being Lithuanian, and then ultimately kind of moved over into to Polish. And then after the uprising of 1863, the Russian says, that's it, no more. All the records going forward now, including Poland and Lithuania, are all going to be in Russian. Only in about 1918 after do you find the Lithuanian church records being in Lithuanian. You might find some that are in German during the part of the World War I when the Germans occupied most of Lithuania. So that's one of the things that, as you said, Michael, that it's important to know the history of the area. And so what I always tell people is that when you're looking for place names, probably I deal with like 5 different languages. I have Lithuanian, Polish, Russian, German, and Yiddish. So, for example, Kaunas is Lithuanian, Kauno, K-O-W-N-O is the Polish spelling, Kovno is the Russian, I forget, Kauen, K-A-U-E-N is German, and I forget what it is in Yiddish. So when you're looking and doing your genealogy and you're trying to find a place, and you go, I Googled it and I can't find that place. And it may be because, well, you've got a different language and and only in some obscure places might they actually have the language, the name for that village or town in the different languages. So you need to be flexible. You need to know the history and the fact that you have multiple languages being used in the same area. And then the other piece of advice I have is when people are trying to, Michael, your name is equally easy to pronounce or spell perfectly. And I always tell people that if you don't have at least 5 or 6 different spellings of your family name, your Eastern European family name, it just means you haven't found enough American documents, because they will murder them. My daughter, when it was Take Your Child to Work Day, I was working for DOD. She came in after the first orientation there. She said, Dad, they handed us business cards and ID badges, and they misspelled Sadauskas. I said, honey, welcome to the real workforce. This will not be the last time Sadauskas is misspelled. As long as it's being spelled right for the check to go to the bank, it's okay.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it's funny, I think back in the days when we used to have telemarketers calling the house phone, and you knew immediately that because it was, is Mr. Matulowicz there, and it's like, well, no, click. But it's interesting because, and I'm sure there's sociologists that have studied this, but for me, it seems like it comes down to a sort of a difference between what our modern understanding of ethnicity is versus the past, and also what our understanding of nationality is versus the past. In a kind of similar vein, when people are doing genealogy and they come across a census record or something, then it says citizenship, Russia, Austria, and then it's, I was Austrian, I never knew that. Well, you're not. You were Pole who happened to be living in the Austrian section. And, for a country like Poland-Lithuania, that Poland being its sort of official language of state, it was almost as if it was, we've, I think, come to understand Poland of centuries ago as this homogenous ethnicity. And in reality, it was nothing but. And you look at some of these cities, you look at Vilnius, which in Polish would be Vilno, and it was split in so many different ways between ethnic Poles and ethnic Lithuanians, Jews, Germans, Russians, and it creates really this amazing tapestry of ethnicity. But as the 20th century dawned, and if you know your history like you and I do, those ethnicities were exploited against each other. But there was also these kind of centuries old animosities. Now, being from the Lithuanian section of Poland-Lithuania, did your family, did they evince any of that? Did you notice, was there any of that sort of tension, even offhandedly or in a sort of joking way? Was there anything that ever kind of came up or no?
Yeah, there were. I remember I must have been, 7 or 8 years old. So I'm in first grade or second grade. And my grandmother tells me with all seriousness, whatever you do, don't marry a Pole or a Jew. And I thought, gee, this is kind of interesting because I'm 8 years old and I'm not getting married for at least another few more years, So, and she said that, and I thought, okay, and I remembered it. She said it one time, and that was it, right? So obviously, so that in my mind, that meant that we must have had an ancestor on her side that had married a Pole, and also someone who was Jewish, because I do have 0.4% of Ashkenazi Jewish DNA ancestry. So I'm pretty confident I will not find a Catholic Church record listing Moshe Goldberg as the father of one of my ancestors. It's going to be probably geez, why does he look so much different than the rest of the kids? I don't know. And then my in-laws, he retired from the Marine Corps, and they traveled to about 60 or 70 different countries all over the world. Eventually they made Lithuania. It was at the end of their list for whatever reason. And so they had visited Poland at one point in the northeast section of Poland, where there's these bison that are in the primeval forest and stuff like that. And I mentioned that to my father, and he goes, "Yeah, that's the land the Poles stole from us. I think, 1600 or something like that." So I mean, he remembered it, and it was okay, fine, but no real tensions there. But I do know when I had a good friend that as Polish-American. He worked on his PhD doing some research about the Polish economy after World War II, and he'd been in Warsaw and Krakow and all over the country. And he said, so Tom, when you go to Lithuania, when you go to Vilnius, did you notice all of the signs in the engravings on the churches? They're all in Polish. And I said, yeah, Bart, that just means that the Lithuanians are very hospitable to visitors. And so they wrote a lot of things in Polish for the Polish tourists to read when they came to visit Lithuania. And so one thing that did bother me is when my daughter is in middle school, right? So, of course, they've got their history book. And this is my pet peeve, and probably you think it's not anything to worry about, is when you look at the map of the Europe of the 1600s or the 1700s, and there's this huge territory in the eastern part of Europe, and it says Poland. It doesn't say Poland and Poland and the Lithuanian Commonwealth, or the Grand Duchy of Lithuania as a Commonwealth. All it is, it says Poland, because I keep saying the historians and map makers are being lazy. They don't put the rest of the letters that go after that. I remember in high school, I was going to Catholic high school, and one of my cousins, the third cousin, her last name was Stesukavicius. Right? So the priest there at the I guess school council, whatever, Father Jesulewicz or Zuzulowicz, depending on your pronunciation, he says, Donna, you really should maybe consider getting your name shortened so it's easier to pronounce, which I thought was ironic coming from Father Jesulewicz or Zuzulowicz, because in his mind, of course, Polish is easy. It's you Lithuanians that need to change the names because it's too hard for people to pronounce. But that was just, I think, the irony. I think it was lost on him, but he thought it made plenty of sense. So, and I think my father, when he was in the hospital, New Britain, we have, a lot of the foreign nurses are from Poland, not the Philippines. And so I always made sure that they knew he spoke Polish, because that way they would more likely identify with him as a patient, as a person, rather than, no, that's the old guy in room 12A or something like that. So he'd chat with them and, like that. And he, especially if they were women, he'd be flirting with them in Polish and stuff like that. So I just figured it was one way to make sure my dad was being taken care of. So, yeah, no. And if he came to the United States, 19 June of 49, he was working went and got a job working in a factory. About 12 days after he got off the boat, or 14 days. And he interviewed in German with the interviewer, because the guy was a German immigrant. He got a job working in the foundry, and half the guys in the foundry were Polish. So he spoke Polish with them. So he kind of like, today it's Spanish, but back then it was, whatever languages of Eastern European countries. And so, yeah, so it was very helpful for him to be able to be fluent. And then when, I always have to be careful when I say this, when Lithuania recovered Vilnius in October of 1939, I know my father said, I lived like a king there because I could speak Polish. Well, Lord knows what he was getting for his Polish speaking skills or whatever. But at that point, there was obviously a large Polish sector in the population. Once World War II ended, and the Russians moved Poland westward by 100 or more miles, seized the Polish land, and then moved them westwards to take the German lands. They also ethnically cleansed Vilnius and maybe Kaunas as well. So from the standpoint, if you look today at the number of Polish speakers as the first language, in Vilnius, it's a lot lower than it would have been right after World War II ended. And then I always like it when I read about the Lithuanian news stories about the Lithuanian minority that's just across the border in Poland, around Suwalki, being oppressed by the Polish country and making them speak Polish. And then, of course, I read the same stories on Polish news about how the Poles in Lithuania are being forced to use Lithuanian names on their identity cards, and they can't have their Polish names and stuff like that. So equally, bad things being said about each other. But I think it's getting better. I think we've got the common enemy of with Russia to worry about. I know they talk about the Suwalki Gap. That's the section that's between Kaliningrad, which is supposedly just temporarily occupied by Russia. If you read what the World War II peace treaty said, it was just temporary. And then you've got Belarus on the other side, which may or may not be a vassal of Russia, because it seems to be now we're warming up to Lukashenko, the last dictator in Europe there. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure why we're butting up with them, but so that's another worry too. But the countries are getting more cooperative and hopefully overcoming any kinds of animosities dating back to, World War I or something like that. So I think things are getting better, but always a little bit of tension and light. So I think maybe this is a good place to tell the story, because I'm going to tell it anyway. Is that the first time the word Lithuania was mentioned in written script was like 1009 AD, and I remember being outside of Washington D.C. I go to the Lithuanian embassy a lot, and which is just like 2 doors down from the Polish embassy, right next to the Cuban embassy. And I was there at the talking to the ambassador, and I it was a big anniversary, 1,000 years of 2009, 1,000 years Lithuania has been, first appeared. And I smiled to him. I said, I see we're not mentioning exactly in what context Lithuania was mentioned 1,000 years ago. And he kind of smiled back at me. He goes, yeah, I know what you mean. And you look back at the history of it, and it's in some, it talks about the martyrdom of Saint Bruno of Kufert, who was a German monk going to try to Christianize the Lithuanian pagans. And of course, it was right near the border of Lithuania and Rus, which is Russia. So we just explained that it was the Russians that must have killed the monk. It wasn't the Lithuanians, because where Lithuania was the last country, the European country to be Christianized in Europe. And I explained to people the reason it was the last one to go is that Lithuanians have been pagans for thousands and thousands of years. And there's this new religion called Christianity. It's been around for maybe like 1,000 years or so. Not sure if it's going to take. It's going to keep. We've been pagans 3,000-4,000 years. Let's check out this religion to see if it's going to be, a passing fad, or it's actually going to go somewhere. And then the one and only king of Lithuania, King Mindaugas, he was crowned in 1253, and he converted to Catholicism. And the only reason he converted to Catholicism is, I guess, back in the day, the only way you got to be an official king was if the Pope recognized you as king. So he became a Christian for the purposes of being made king of Lithuania in 1253. And then a few years went by, he went back to the old ways, of paganism and such like that. So he was the one and only king. And then supposedly there was a second king, but supposedly the story is the Poles intercepted the crown coming from the Vatican, and it never got to the actual Lithuanian that was going to be crowned king. So, there's always those different stories, just like we can argue about the nationality of Casimir Pulaski, some others. It's like we could get, I can get a real good argument going about who's what nationality. And, perfect example is that there were two brothers. One was in the first parliament of independent Poland, and the other one was a brother who signed the Lithuanian Declaration of Independence. So here they are, they're brothers, same mother, same father, born same place. One's Polish, one's Lithuanian. Who's right? So that's the craziness. So I'm flexible. So I'm sure we have some skeletons of Polish ancestors or whatever. Who knows? It's just crazy. But you just have to recognize that it's not cut and dry. And you're absolutely right, perfectly about Russian or the Polish or whatever, the three partitions of Poland. My friend has his father. His company was filling out forms, and they needed to know the birthplace of his father. He goes, well, when? He said, well, what do you mean? Well, when he was born, it was Austria-Hungary. Then later on, it was in Poland, and today it's now in Ukraine. So which country do you want me to use? It's the same town, Lviv, Lvov, stuff like that. So Americans, I think, especially if they've got the ancestry from the Mayflower or the Revolutionary War, they just don't have that concept that those of us who may be Eastern European and recent arrivals to the United States. It's not as cut and dry.
No, it certainly isn't. But it's also one of those things where a lot of those maybe historical differences were certainly exploited, especially by Stalin after the Second World War, and the ethnic cleansing that went on and all that. But it's kind of, you wonder, if we were having this conversation, 100 years ago, or before the First World War, even, or after the First World War, since 2026, would it even be a factor? And it's also kind of a mystery sometimes to me, but I think it speaks to how people just don't know their history. Because if you look at place names in this country, San Francisco, Los Angeles, it's the city of angels, the St. Francis's city, and but it's kind of just taken for granted, and it's in terms of, so it's the same way when you talk about Vilnius being Vilno, or Lviv being Lviv, or it's not, but it's that sort of extrapolation that just doesn't even occur, and it's just funny, and as someone who studies history, that people don't even begin to try and understand it, blows my mind.
what I find fascinating, in upstate New York, you have a town called Pulaski, and it's named after Kazimir Pulaski, but it's Pulaski. It's not ski. And you look up the town, and it says it's named after Kazimir Pulaski. Nobody probably who lives there thinks anything about the fact that our town is named after this guy, but we don't pronounce his last name the same way that everybody else does. So, go figure. And that's just one small example. But Americans were horrible at history. I know when we go to vacation at the Outer Banks in North Carolina, I would always find the Lithuanians, because there were all these university students working 5 jobs, 80 hours a week to earn money before they will go back. And I remember running into these two young ladies working in the deli department of the food line. And I kind of surprised them speaking some Lithuanian. And they said, "Oh, when did you come here?" I go, No, I was born here." She says, "Oh, okay." And they said, "These Americans, they don't know a lot about geography." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, they asked us where we were from, and we said we're from Lithuania." And they said, "Really? Where in South America is that?" I said, "Okay, fine." And then there was a guy bagging groceries, and someone asked him and said, "Oh, where are you from?" He goes, "Oh, Czechoslovakia." He goes, "Oh, okay." And they leave, and I go, So which is it, the Czech Republic or Slovakia?" Slovakia, but it's easier just to say Czechoslovakia. I don't have to explain. Yeah.
A lot of times when people they sort of describe, be it stereotype even, about what Poles are, there's usually a certain list, and a lot of times it's hardworking, it's family oriented, traditional, and then there's some negative ones, which I'm not going to bear repeating. Have you noticed a difference in how sort of Lithuanians see themselves, their own characteristics, or as other people perceive them?
Well, I've had someone describe, you have the 3 Baltic states, you have Lithuania, then you have Latvia, and then you have Estonia. And someone described the Lithuanians as the Italians of the Baltics, because we're much, I guess, more excitable, outgoing, or whatever, unlike the Estonians, because they're right across from the Gulf, from Finland and stuff like that. So all the Lithuanians are Catholics. They always talk about the 2 religions of Lithuania, Catholicism and basketball. And sometimes it's uncertain as to which is the first one and which is the second. But I think, you meet people, like I may tell the joke before, someone says, "Oh, what nationality?" I'm Lithuanian. They go, "Oh, you're a nickel-plated Polak, because, you're trying to be better than being Polish," and stuff like that. I mean, to me, I've heard that lots of times, but I think, Michael, you mentioned that was a good one for you, that you hadn't.
No, I've never heard that one before. No.
Yeah. So, or you get nicknames, like when I went to graduate school in Chicago, and, I thought, "Oh, here are all these Lithuanians here, be welcomed and everything." And I get there, and it's kind of like, "Oh, they're all Lithuanians here." It's the third largest population of Lithuanians in the world, outside of, probably the largest outside the country, and it's like, I wasn't a novelty, that was kind of like, okay, you go there. Or then I found out there's a nickname, Lugans, Lugan. I have no idea where that comes from, and I think that's a Chicagoan term. I never heard it anywhere else before, and such like that. But I mean, I think today the people, younger generation than I, because I still think I'm young, but it's only a number, that probably Lithuanian Americans and Polish Americans, and don't think anything at all about any kind of differences other than both countries in Europe. I forget whether I think we're supposed to call it Central Europe because somehow Eastern Europe gets to be a negative connotation or whatever. But they're not even thinking about it. I think it's the older generation that would remember that. Though it's been a while since I saw people ranting and raving about the Poles on some of the Lithuanian Facebook groups that I go on. And again, it's there's you just have to accept the fact that you're looking at records. They're going to be in Polish. I mean, I will find names that are in my in the church records from the Geneteka that are Polish. All the towns are in the Polish names. Sometimes they're nice enough to mention the Lithuanian version. Like if you go there, I look under Litwa, Litwa, which is Polish for Lithuania, and there's like 190 or 200 church records, about 1 million plus records that have been transcribed. But unfortunately, I've got to spell them using the Polish spellings. And then once I find them, I then have to get somebody on the Lithuanian group saying, so what would this be in Lithuanian? Or if I'm doing the other way, say, hey, I've got this Lithuanian last name, and I think they're from this area. So what am I supposed to use for their given name and their surname to make it Polish so it'll show up in the records? And it's convenient. And I think people doing the genealogy have gone anywhere into it will know that, hey, things are written in Polish, and, who is, who's Polish, like I think Zesko was born in what today is Ukraine, so he wasn't born in modern day Poland and modern day Lithuania. And then you look at parts of where Poland is today. It used to be German before World War II and stuff like that. So you need to get your maps books out there and be able to recognize that, hey, it's not all going to be nice and simple, and it's not all online, because I always tell people that just because you can't find it online doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because there's stuff that nobody, except for you, your family, would care to see something, resources expended to digitize it and such like that. And people have to, especially I sound like an old guy. The younger folks think, well, if I can't find that on my iPhone, so it must not exist.
It's interesting you mentioned Chicago. I was remembering something I had either read or a documentary I'd seen about how there was this Polish parish, and an Irish American bishop assigned a Lithuanian priest, and a number of the congregants sent him back basically beaten senseless to the bishop. And it kind of, it was definitely in a book or something I said that was speaking about the Polish American experience. Even then, you're talking like the turn of the 20th century. There was still this perception on the part of Americans who had been, not even Americans, you're talking about immigrants of a more recent time, possibly, that also they just were not aware of those sort of ethnic peculiarities. And then once nationalism and that sense kind of took hold, it became an animal that just no one could really control.
I think there's some books I've got in the history of all these. Somebody did a nice 3-volume set of Lithuanian parishes and organizations in the United States, and they had, I forget, maybe it was Pennsylvania, where they sent the bishop, the Irish bishop, like you said, sent a Polish-speaking priest to the Lithuanian parish, and that did not go well, and stuff like that. Or if there were enough Lithuanians in a Polish parish, they wanted to break off and start their own ethnic parish. There was the pastor wasn't going to let them go away because partly not big part of it being, well, there's a lot of parishioners who are donating money, and I don't want them to be leaving my church and start their own. So it's today, now it's more on the Catholic side, Catholic Church side. We're just happy to have you come. We're not going to ask you about your ethnicity or stuff like that, and things like that. But it's in my home parish was shut down, shortage of parishioners and priests as well, and I think it may have been repurposed as for some evangelical church or whatever. I guess they have a whole process where they desanctify the Catholic Church and sell or move the stained glass windows out and stuff, and then a new group comes in, and so it's they have to decommission it as a Catholic church, and I have no idea. Unfortunately, that's happening a lot. And I look at a lot of the ancestries that I'm researching over Pennsylvania, where you've got one, two, multiple churches in a small town, and they've consolidated 3 parishes, a Polish parish and a Lithuanian one, and something else, and all into one place because they just can't sustain that kind of church infrastructure with the number of parishioners they have, or a shortage of priests, because it's not like in the old days where you had one son that's going to go in the military, the other one's going to become a priest, and then the third one a doctor or something like that. Now it's like hard to get the calling, for someone to be called to be a priest or a nun or some religious. I know the one church my daughter is going to, a nearby town, he was probably in his 30s before he got the call to leave his job as a consultant to become a priest and stuff like that. So
the being such a strong one faith, as Lithuanians and Poles both were kind of overwhelmingly Catholic, and how it manifested itself here in the United States in these particular communities, especially my own experience being in the coal region. I think and it was interesting how some of these towns, these kind of patch towns, became primarily one ethnicity or not. And it was Shenandoah was kind of the famous my grandfather was always, oh, that's the Lithuanian town, because there was St. George's Lithuanian Church, which was this massive, I think it was the largest, some statistic about it being like the largest maybe Lithuanian church in the United States.
Yeah.
And when they did this consolidation, the population changed and the church was torn down.
That was
heart-wrenching.
Yeah, a lot of very unhappy people posting and stuff like that.
We think about this too at our own, location in Camden, where it's, you have all those kind of external factors, but then it gets to, there's something worth preserving in this place, whether it's just artwork or culturally, you get that, you understand the dollars and cents and things, but there's something beyond that. And to your point about sort of these kind of consolidations and losing sort of these ethnic parishes that were centers in a lot of ways of Lithuanian heritage, what are kind of some other ways you would see about preserving that if some of the churches are indeed, going by the wayside?
I know. I was just looking at something on Facebook about my old parish church, and they had built a very large Lithuanian style cross. It's very unique to Lithuanian culture. And that had been relocated to another parish that's still a going concern, so to speak, and such like that. And I think they may have redistributed some of the stained glass windows, because I remember very beautiful, and they'd have the name of the family that donated it way back when. And it's a great big church. A lot of ethnic things going on, and it's just that the people moved out to the suburbs and the decline and such like that, and it's hard. I mean, I think the fact that some people have documented the histories. Somebody had gone out, and this couple, husband and wife from Lithuania, made a tour, I guess over 3 summers across the United States, and put together kind of like on the website all of these cultural locations, all over the United States that people were working. I mean, there was the first Lithuanians. They had Lithuanians showing up in Texas, coming in out of Galveston, Texas, in the 1850s or 1840s, or the coal mines in Oklahoma. I didn't even know they had coal mines in Oklahoma. It's just oil fields. But just people being there, different parts of the country, and hopefully more than just a little plaque on the side of the road that talks about the ethnicity. I think more and more books are being written, and you'd hate to read to lose it. And I know my daughter has to subject her to the Lithuanian stories, and okay, Dad, rolls her eyes. But, I've had a long time to work with her. and I'm really bad about not having. She went to Lithuanian school on Saturdays, but unfortunately, half the kids in the class were born in Lithuania, and they always tell her, "How come you can't be like Kęstutis? His Lithuanian is so much better." And it's like, yeah, try his English. He's born there. The family came here, so she knows a few words, and I know she has her ethnicity is recognizing. A name like Sadauskas, you're going to not pass for Irish. You might, maybe in Alabama, but it's hard. It's trying to keep the especially Poland is much larger population wise, and trying to get the word out. It's an archaic language, a very hard language. Supposedly, at least we say it's the closest living language to Sanskrit. It didn't get simplified. So if you just ask somebody trying to learn the language, they'll tell you about it. I actually met a linguist who was studying Lithuanian only because of the uniqueness of the language, and not because he was, ethnically Lithuanian or anything like that. So just trying to learn about the culture.
Yeah, and to that point, I kind of was wondering. So if someone is sort of just learning that they are Lithuanian, whether it's through genealogy, DNA tests, or what have you, what would kind of be your advice for them learning more about the culture? Polish communities, we have our dance groups are big, our language schools, our churches, of course, that are around. And are there particular traditions that you kind of can point people to? What would be kind of your go-to first step?
Lots of different groups on Facebook. Lithuanian culture, Lithuanian recipes. Same thing with after World War II and the diaspora, where all the refugees in the camps. The big push was maintaining the culture. So you had like the Lithuanian language schools, the dance groups, and such like that. Some places like here up the street in Baltimore, you have the Baltimore Lithuanian Hall. As a matter of fact, they just had something last Saturday where they had multiple dance groups from all sorts of, Ukrainian, Polish, Lithuanian. I don't know if they had Thai, Hindu. So it's kind of like, you can see 5 or 6 different cultures all in one fell swoop, while the kitchen downstairs is making Lithuanian dishes and beer, selling beer. So we're lucky there. In Washington, D.C., not so much. We have the rival communities, so that we've agreed that for Independence Day, Lithuanian Independence, the one they celebrate in February, the Washington, D.C. group celebrates it. And then the Independence from 1991, the Baltimore group celebrates it. And, there's pockets of Lithuanian groups in Portland, Oregon, and Los Angeles. And, it's always interesting to see where groups might be that have, festivals up in eastern Pennsylvania. Used to be Frackville, Pennsylvania, in Northumberland County, and now it's in. I was up there this summer helping doing genealogy. I can't remember the name of it, but Facebook has got a lot of groups there. Lithuanian. It's amazing now. Some of them are maybe like 200 people, and he posts it, I think, once a week or something. Others are very active. And just remember that when you find out that horse thief that was in your family tree, that wasn't you, and it just happens.
Yeah.
People, they're not all saints.
Right. Yeah. No, there's a lot of great stories, and some interesting ones too that were kind of hidden. So since generally our listeners are Polish or Polish American, what would you like us as Polish Americans to know about Lithuanian Americans or Lithuanians in general? What would be kind of a advice or sort of something to tell them about Lithuanians in that relationship?
If you look at the history books of 1386, Lithuanian Grand Duke married a Polish queen, and kind of from 1386 on, if you follow it to 1795 with the third partition of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, that the countries were united for gosh knows how long, and that other than the fact that you can't rely on where were they born? You've got pockets of different nationalities all over the place, and that they've all suffered through the same Russian occupation. oppression and things like that. Some were took longer than others to regain their independence. Have some of the same common threats, some of the same common foods. Though it seems the potato, besides the Irish, you got Polish and Lithuanians. What I always found fascinating is one of my favorite kinds of Lithuanian food is cold beet soup, sheltobarščiai, which I always found fascinating that we serve it, it's cold in summertime, and then we serve it along with boiled potatoes, peeled boiled potatoes. So you're having this really nice cold soup, and there's this dish of potatoes that are like steaming hot, and you're eating them with the cold soup. It kind of defeats the purpose a little bit, but I always use that as kind of a measure when I go to a restaurant, Lithuanian restaurant. I'll try their cold beet soup, or even or borscht, or whatever. It's the same. It's not like potato pancakes. Well, latkes or blina or whatever. So it's a lot of the same thing, same kind of food, and maybe the costumes are a little different, but a lot of the dance routines the same, and a lot of commonality, more so than divides us. Though, as you said, Michael, being able to divide groups based on ethnic tensions that may or may not really exist is something that people find issues. Even in the United States, we have certain issues that are cultural that may divide groups when the groups have more things in common than not, and such. So yeah, it's I think we're as I said, the Chinese fortune cookie that says, "May you live in interesting times." That certainly is the case that we're living in there now. It's fascinating that people are beginning to look into their ancestry. And the one piece of advice I would have about genealogy is get started today. Start asking questions. One thing that I found useful is you don't bring your relative into the room with the bright lights and then start questioning them like it's a police interrogation. I know I was trying to find my father about his aunt lived across the river from them, and that they would go across this river to go to school. And then in wintertime, they would walk across the frozen river to go to school. And I said to my dad, I said, well, did you send your little sister ahead when it was springtime to find all the soft spots in the ice? He goes, no. We stayed with my aunt over there sometimes. And then to try to get him to talk a little bit, I said to him, I said, Dad, on your farm when you grew up, did you have horses? Because your granddaughter really likes horses, and got kind of talking a little bit about there, and indirectly that's when he mentioned that his aunt was across the river there, and that's where they would stay. So just let him talk, and that'll trigger something. Because if you ask him outright, specifically, people aren't going to remember. You just let him go and take notes, and then the other piece of advice is when you're doing this kind of research, kind of when they tell you some factoid, then write it down. Write down who said it, or where did you find this piece of information, and the date of when that piece of information was created. Be it some birth certificate, be it a census record. What year was that census? So you can watch the migration of your last name as it changes over the course of time. Is the census taker an Irish guy trying to write down Eastern European names, or is it somebody who's a Polish or Lithuanian, so they know how to spell Sadauskas or Makalevich's? I'm sorry, I turned it into a Lithuanian name.
That's okay.
But that kind of thing like that, and it's a group effort, because I started knowing Zilcho, and as time went on, lots of people helped me, and I always try to help other people as well. And it's a work in progress. It's a group effort. If you got a chance to go to some presentations or something like that, go ahead. You never know what you're going to learn.
It seems like the lesson, though, is that in Polish and Lithuania, it was born out of a cooperative agreement, and mutual interests and mutual hopes. And I think that's a real lesson that, regardless of whether you're in one or the other, we could certainly hope to follow.
Or how much do you have to be both?
Or that too.
Yeah.
That too. I love talking to people who are passionate about their heritage and genealogy, and because it's just such this wealth of information and And then, and I love history because history is messy and history is complicated, but it also can contain these delightful lessons for today, and help us to explain who we are, and whether it's in our DNA or not. And so it's just wonderful. And it's wonderful to what I hope is to kind of clear up some of misconceptions about what Poland-Lithuania is, and also just kind of bring some of that history to light. Well, thank you so much. And
Thank
so,
you.
how do you say goodbye in Lithuanian, or thank you and goodbye? How do you say?
Or
I won't put you on the spot, but
I'll just say pasimatysim. I'll see you later.
okay. Well, do zobaczenia, which is
Okay.
in Polish. So we'll see you later as well.
Our goal with this podcast is to present elements of our Polish history, heritage, and faith that help us to understand who we are by learning about where and what type of people we came from. However, in so doing, there may sometimes appear to exist the temptation to think of Polish ethnicity as a static concept, as a sort of isolated bloodline that has existed since 1966, devoid of any possible variations and changes. Not only would this be woefully inaccurate, but to acknowledge the presence of a rich tapestry of multiple ethnicities within Polish should be a source of immense pride. The marriage of Jadwiga and Władysław in the 14th century was indeed brought out of a need for cooperation in the world that was seeking Poland's destruction. Yet, their marriage of convenience was to give birth to a nation-state powerhouse which developed a rich and impressive heritage, physically adorned with the breathtaking architecture and culture now seen in the great cities of Warszawa, Kraków, Vilnius, and Kaunas, which tourists from around the world still flock to absorb. The more we look into our own history, the more we can understand how and where the world is today, as well as how we can again further evolve so that the old threats of intolerance and hatred don't divide us further and threaten our current survival. After all, the philosophical answer to the title of Tom's talk, which we took for the title of our own episode of Polish, Lithuanian, it's all the same, isn't it? Is indeed yes. For ultimately, we are all human beings, created in the image and likeness of the divine, and worthy of dignity, respect, and love. Polish, Lithuanian, or like me, a combination of both. We all have a unique history to share, but one that is part of the greater human experience of attempting to understand our world. If our discussion today has left you a bit confused by the geography of the centuries, be sure to check out our Facebook page for helpful links to maps and articles this month, explaining Polish and Lithuanian borders and identities. You can also contact Tom as well for any genealogical research needs you may have via his email at tomdoesgenealogy@gmail.com, and we will provide links to his contact information in our show notes and social media pages as well. As always, don't forget to follow our social media pages, as well as subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcasts, in order to ensure you get the latest updates when new episodes drop. This will especially be helpful when our Polish-Lithuanian Saint of the Month episode comes out later this month. Reach out to us anytime at pierogideprayer@gmail.com, or come visit us, better yet, each and every Sunday at 10 a.m. at St. Joseph's Polish Church in Camden. Until next time, salte some pierogi and sit with the saint. Dziękujemy, thank you, and do usłyszenia.